Hello, everybody. Welcome to our panel. My name is Arun Manoharan. I'm an associate professor in the Department of Public Policy, Public Affairs at the University of Massachusetts, Boston. And I have here with me Dr. Catherine Willoughby, who's our panel discussant. She's a professor of public administration and policy at the School of Public and International Affairs, University of Georgia. So our panel is going to focus on local government and implementation of performance measurement. It's really a good timing. If you look at all the great discussion that happened today, this will be a nice, like a culmination of all the discussion. And in this panel, the speakers are going to focus on the actual implementation aspects of performance measurement. What are the factors that influence the implementation? And also how do you sustain the performance measurement? So the speakers today we have David Childs, who's going to talk about performance best practices and what really works in the real world. This will be followed by Josephine Schaefer, who will talk about the factors that influence performance of public libraries, especially the legal structures. And this will be followed by Lyle Gray, who will talk about sustaining a performance measurement system. And we have Graham Smith, who will talk about the performance measurement trends in Australia. Okay. So with this, I will hand it over to David. Yes.
All right. Thank you. And as was said, I'm going to talk about performance best practices, what truly works in the real world. I do have my PhD in management, and I have also taught some courses in performance management, in systems thinking, in transformational leadership. And in addition to that, my day job for 35 years was managing city and county level government agencies. And for those 35 years, I actually implemented performance management programs in those agencies. So a lot of what I'm about
Lloyd, can you get that?
I'm sorry?
No, hello? That's fine. Yeah, no. You can go ahead, David.
And so a lot of what I'm about to say is sort of rooted in that 35 years of implementing management and measurement into city and county level agencies. For the past 40 years, most government performance measurement programs have gathered hundreds to thousands of measures that are rarely looked at unless they can be used to embarrass, punish, and eliminate, or be used to justify bad and/or self-serving decisions. Worse, most everyone knows this. Consequently, most such measurement programs are routinely undermined and sabotaged by staff who create meaningless measures designed to measure the wrong things, and/or staff will report manipulated results in order to distort reality, thereby making it easier for staff to discredit the data and protect themselves should a data-wielding Grim Reaper ever come calling. As a result, since the rise of the performance management movement in the 70s, governments have not maximized its potential benefits. The US federal government debt is now over 100% of GDP, yet we have a deteriorating infrastructure. Our public education system spends more per pupil than any other nation, yet we rank roughly 25th in the world in test scores. And I could go on. Similar data documenting deteriorating outcomes despite increased spending can also be cited relative to many states and local governments. And I have been pleased to see that other presentations in this conference have researched and documented similar results, particularly Ms. Liu's paper about measures in the US and China, Mr. Graham Smith's paper about measures in Australia, and Mr. Plamakis's presentation regarding measures in Greece. Certainly, after 40 years, the performance measurement and management movement does have some success stories. And those successes consistently document positive impacts of between 25 and 40% or more. But overall, performance measurement has created for itself a reputation for bad intentions that have resulted in, at best, no results, and at worst, destructive ones. So how does the performance management movement turn this around? How do we make the next 40 years more constructive and more successful than the past 40? What do we need to start doing tomorrow that will result 40 years from now in a conference that can document and celebrate our many successes rather than trying to fix our poor image and limited impacts? First, as Will Rogers said, if you find yourself in a hole, stop digging. Fortunately, the purpose of this conference is to do exactly that. So we ask the core question: what have most of us been doing wrong, and what have the few successful performance management programs been doing differently and much more effectively than the rest of us? Hopefully, as this discussion continues beyond this conference, that question will be posed to the many government agencies that have successfully produced documentable improvements, as a result of their performance management programs. Organizations such as the cities of Irving, Texas, El Paso, Texas, Fort Collins, Colorado, and others at all levels of government, so that their effective practices can be identified, recommended, and more widely adopted by others. My purpose today is to share my own journey of implementing performance management into several city and county level agencies. Through those 35 years of trial and error, I adopted and adapted what I felt were a few core practices that produced some effective outcomes. Even though I worked in two communities where considerable population growth created increased demands on government services, and even though we experienced increased responsibility demands created by state and federal mandates, and we experienced budget increases created by increased healthcare plan costs and technology costs, in 35 years, we never asked for any budget increase above COLA. Secondly, in most years, we asked for a continuation budget. Third, we allowed staffing needs to attrition down by an average of 20%. Four, we documentably improved productivity per staff position by an average of 25%. Fifth, we received 10 written documentable customer compliments for every written complaint. Six, we attracted quality staff from other agencies who, when they interviewed with us, stated that they had applied to work for us because they wanted to work for, quote, a quality organization. And seven, over one 20-year period, we earned 5 state level and 4 national recognitions for excellence. I do not say this to pat myself on the back. I say it to document that the specific actions that I'm about to talk about produced what I believe to be desirable impacts that can also be easily replicated by others. So how did we do it? And I'm going to make 5 quick points. First, measures should be introduced as a positive. When measures are first introduced, cite specific measures that will be used to improve staff quality of life, customer satisfaction, and organizational successful achievement of its desired outcomes. Secondly, introduce a recognition and reward program. State that staff who meet monthly performance standards, things such as high productivity, low error rates, high attendance, customer compliments, are contributing an innovative improvement in the organization's operations, that such things will be recognized. Rewards can be minimal, nothing more than gift cards to a coffee shop or jars of mixed nuts. But to personally award the recognition in front of coworkers emphasizes organizational appreciation of quality, measurable performance, and it visibly emphasizes the positive impacts and personal benefits of the measurement program. Third, seek staff assistance in creating the performance standards. Ask a committee of staff representatives, and I might add a committee of staff representatives who are chosen by the staff themselves. They are not pets of the bosses, to help establish the performance standards and measures at what is considered to be a B+ standard of performance. For example, an expected attendance standard would not be 100%. It would probably be in the range of 90 to 93%. Staff will consider the program and the measures more credible and will be more supportive of the program when they themselves have helped design it. As staff begins meeting the standards, do not raise the bar and increase the standards. Almost every conference that I ever presented at, when I got to this point, almost every time I got to this, someone would raise their hand and say, so once you get them meeting that standard, you raise the bar, right? I was amazed at how often that was brought up. We must remember that the goal is to encourage, recognize, and reward B+ performance, not to destroy the program's credibility and staff morale. 4, use the measures when conducting staff performance reviews and when conducting strategic planning meetings. Using measures during staff performance reviews re-emphasizes to staff that the measures and their personal performance relative to the measures are a priority. Referring to the measures during the review also grounds their review in documentable data, so that staff cannot allege that a poor review is a personal vendetta and not truly rooted in performance. Likewise, referring to measures during strategic planning meetings reminds everyone that the measures are a foundational indicator of to what degree the organization is or is not achieving its goals. And finally, number 5, maintain a simple program. The legendary expert on leadership, Peter Drucker, recommended that organizations utilize no more than 5 to 7 core measures that can provide insight into the performance of almost every aspect of the organization. A legendary example of this is Southwest Airlines, which actually developed one core measure that could be used as a starting point of analysis for almost every department in the company. The goal should be a few measures that serve as conversation starters. Measures should provide an accurate view of the tip of the iceberg, providing the data that aids in helping to focus in the right places and ask the right follow-up questions. Then, knowledgeable staff will conduct follow-up analysis to obtain the deeper, more detailed understanding of the organization's opportunities for improvement. And measures should be quickly and easily collected. During my career, we made a priority of making certain that we used only monthly measures and monthly reports that could be compiled and produced in less than an hour per month. Measures should be seen as a quick, easy, valuable support aid to experienced and knowledgeable staff, not seen as an insatiable migraine headache that drains time, resources, and labor. These 5 actions have created performance cultures that have produced an average of 25% improved performance across several city and county government agencies. They succeeded because first, they obtained staff participation, buy-in, and respect, rather than suspicion and sabotage. Secondly, they were considered to be a quick, easy, insightful aid to constant improvement, rather than an insatiable, time and resource eating evil monster. And 3, their benefits to individual staff and their contributions toward achieving organizational goals were constantly documented and verified. Hopefully, these actions can serve as a model for building successful and effective performance management practices throughout government. Thank you.
Thank you, David. That was a great start to our panel. So now we will have Josephine, who's going to talk to us about the legal structure and performance of public libraries.
Hi, sorry to be a moment late. I am hopping around meetings today, as I'm sure we all are. I will share my screen. I don't have too many slides, I promise. So this is an ongoing project of mine that has sputtered and started, ended, and we continue to work on it. I actually have several students from the math department here at UNO working on it with me. We have a very large data set about what I think is a very rich topic, but it's taking us a lot of time to work through some of the data challenges. The topic, the sort of unit of analysis is public libraries. And we are interested in the performance of public libraries, and we're going to be able to tackle that question from a variety of theoretical frameworks, we hope, but we'll see how far we get. So, of course, I think it's hard to separate ourselves from and our communities from these sort of ubiquitous institutions, public libraries. I have a 6-year-old and a 4-year-old, and we are at our public library. And when it closed because of COVID, it was a notable loss for us. So, and I don't think my story is unique there. I think they are sort of all around us. I'll actually show you a map. They are, in fact, all around us. But I'm going to place them into the sort of their quasi-governmental. There are a variety of legal structures that from which libraries operate. And so I thought it was a really interesting test case for questions about performance. We are using the Institute of Museum and Library Services does essentially a census survey of public libraries every year, like 9,800 libraries per year for this particular working paper, we're using 2010 to 2018 longitudinal panel data set, and so many challenges. So libraries come in and out. Central libraries report for different outlets, but then you have data on the outlets as well that has to be matched and paired in terms of data challenges. Oh, they use several, you know, there's like 9 different imputation methods and 6 different missing codes. Data-wise, it is a zoo, but again, a really rich data set. So for this topic, I really want to place, I want to talk about performance, but I'm interested in the extent to which structure matters. So there in public administration, the publicness idea that a private institution will have different performance than a public institution, essentially just because they're different, because one is private and one is public. I think we've added a lot to that literature over time, and we think and know that management matters as well, and there are all of these intervening variables, but there's still a long and rich theoretical tradition that just suggests that that legal structure, that organizational structure even will shape performance. So this is that publicness grid, been around for a while, and it just suggests that organizations are different based on where they receive funds from, as well as the level of sort of political control. What you will see though, well, so inherent to this description is that structure matters, right? The way we're set up is somehow going to influence performance, maybe even more than all of these intervening variables. But here, just 1 year of data. These are the different legal structures that are coded for public libraries. And I don't know about y'all, but I looked at this and went, really? Like you know, we know that especially at the local level, we have this decentralization, but there is a great variety. And even within this list, right, we don't have, you know, this clear scale of publicness. We have some very public yet different legal structures. So nonprofit association or agency, county government, municipal government, multi-jurisdictional, which we're going in and looking at a little bit more, because we also have a code for if it's a city county. So what do they mean specifically by multi-jurisdictional? How many jurisdictions had to be involved before it was coded that or something else? Native American and tribal government. Other, we're looking into it. Then we also have library districts, so specific special districts set up just to manage the libraries. Whole big literature about why that might have happened, as well as then school districts that and this would not be a school library. This would be what we traditionally think of as a public library, which is a term I'm starting to grapple is problematic, and might also have a library to school, but it's a school district managing a local community library. And this is for just 1 year of the data that we're using, how many of those libraries. You can't see it well here, but we tried to map it, starting to look at some regional differences. Again, because they're so small, it's a little bit hard to see, but you'll see some of the special districts concentrated up here, a little bit down in Texas. They always do things differently. The majority, as you saw on the last slide, are managed by the city, but we do have, you know, that's a fair amount of variety to test the question that I'm particularly interested in. It is a rich data set in terms of options we have. This is what we've honed in on to measure performance. Because of the size of the data set, we are going to have to normalize all of these by legal service area. We're working on it. We've messed around with logging them, et cetera, but it's not necessary. But we do have great variety. I'll show a couple of them. So we're looking at total print materials, looking at electronic books, We're looking at public service hours. The number of service hours that they're open, we're considering getting rid of that. Number of visits to the library, reference transactions, circulation transactions, total programs, children's programs, and internet computer. I think that one's actually by hours. Really tried to look at the scale of performance. We have lots of inputs in our independent variables, but I think we capture here both outputs, right? Print material, ebooks, as well as outcomes, the actual usage with those library visits. So I felt we were able to capture a fair amount of things. There's some breakdowns. There are more performance variables that are captured in the survey, but several of them have issues, reliability, a lot of missing data. And so, yeah, it was a data game as well as a theoretical game to find, like consistently what are all libraries going to be doing? What can we expect that is going to happen? Even that children's programs, we looked at it and it is pretty consistent that there is a focus there. We've looked at all of these over time. You might imagine that during the Great Recession, a lot of usage went up. The ebooks variable over time is just kind of amazing to watch. It was really nothing until just maybe like 2016, and then it's just shot up in terms of the number of ebooks offered. So I think it's a real look into community and how people interact with the library as you look at these variables, not just at one point in time, but over time. I won't get into that today, but we have some of that. Just for example, some of our library programs. Again, you can see some density in places that are actually pretty small, but pretty high use. I'm right here somewhere in Nebraska, and you can see we use our public libraries quite a bit, despite a very small population compared to some other places. I don't have much for you today. This is the factor analysis. So we've run a couple models with separate dependent variables just to really see how everything's operating together. We are absolutely going to do an index score. You'll note that everything loads really closely together, which we have like an alpha reliability of like 7.78 here. So, we feel really good that these capture performance. You'll note that ebook is really different, but again, this is taking all of that data back to 2010, and it's just really recently that ebooks have taken off, so that's not surprising there. So not much in terms of modeling to show, but I'm really sort of excited to have a conversation about what we did right in terms of capturing the performance of public libraries and what's still missing, as well as the extent to which others think that structure does matter for performance that we can. And so we have, in terms of independent variables, we have all of the we have funding, we have staff, but we don't have a lot of sort of variation in management. The best variable we have there is if they're like a certified librarian versus just a staff that works at the library. So we do have, and we have the number of certified librarians, but we don't have a lot to actual management. We're also putting in a lot of community level variables from the census, including level of education in the community, percent white, median incomes, and number of percent of the population that's under age 5, because we do expect that those libraries are going to have a different bend, right? A different focus on those programs versus circulation than other libraries. I will stop there.
Thank you, Josephine. This is a good presentation on structure. We look at structure always in terms of the city's performance measurement, but this is really good to see it applied specifically to public libraries. Next, we have Lyle Ray, who's going to talk to us about launching and sustaining a performance measurement system. Lyle, you have to unmute.
Let me see if I can, do I have share screen? There we go. Can you see that? Great,
Yes.
thank you. Thank you very much. It's good to be here on this call. There's a lot of relevant presentations. I want to focus on, I think, a critical issue of launching and sustaining performance measurement systems. I've done performance measurement systems for a long time, and many of them disappear after a few years and get reestablished over and over and over again. And I think some of the things we can learn are how to get there. Just to mention, I have practitioner experience in state, regional, county, and local performance measurement systems, and I co-wrote a book on results that matter with Paul Epstein. So I'm very interested in this, and I teach performance measurement. Let me just give you a point. One of the real deals I think about performance measurement, and was alluded to earlier, is that it needs to be around for quite a while so that we can use it as a GPS system to adjust programs to get desired results. If you keep changing the metrics or you change the system over time, it doesn't have the same power to provide that kind of input. And I think the starting over and over again is that old parable, you can't dig a well with 100 1-foot holes. You got to stick with performance measurement systems and use them quite a bit. So I had, and I'll go through this very quickly, 7 steps to launch and sustain performance measurement systems. So let me just plunge in because I know we're limited in time. The first thing I think oftentimes is we don't do a proper situation assessment of where we're going with the performance measurement system. And so one of the recommendations is to do a major assessment of where the leadership support is, what are the external drivers for performance measurement, what's the relevant organizational capacity in data or other kinds of things, support and opposition in the organization and the environment, a history of performance measurement systems, ones that have come before. There's nothing worse than something being done and failed to cause havoc. And then organizational culture around data and decision making. Dave was talking about this too, but you can't use performance measurement systems as the pretext to execute messengers of bad news, because then that'll cause a very short system. But so the first thing is a detailed situation assessment of your organization you're going into. The second is really, what are the motivations for doing a performance management system? I think it's also important to know why people are doing this. Are we doing it to improve performance? Are we doing it to learn what's working? Are we evaluating how agencies are performing? Are we looking at where the next dollar ought to be spent in a local government budget, for example? Obviously, control of the organization, motivate employees, and to promote the program to the public, which is saying it works. So the second point here, I think, is it's very important to know, why you and the organization are doing this. And if you're doing it for reasons other than the people who are authorizing this, you're going to get into a lot of loggerheads. Then the other piece of this is developing a sequence to establish and expand a performance measurement system. I'm a believer in incremental growth in performance measurement systems. The ones I've seen crash and burn, start out with, as opposed to Peter Drucker's 5 to 7, start out with 500 indicators, and it crashes of its own weight and is never seen again. But if you know what they are. But what I've learned over the years is one good foundation for this is the annual budget. You got to do a budget, and you can put in goals and performance measures in the budget. That was the first thing I did as a county manager. Every department had goals, and they reported on last year's performance. And so it became institutionalized. You can't get rid of the budget. It was very, very useful. The second reason, sequencing, if you have organizational strategic plans and you want to get 3 things done this year, you should measure them. So you use the budget, you use the strategic planning process, you benchmark your programs or services. I was bragging as a county manager in Dakota County, Minnesota. We had the lowest tax rate of any urban county in the state and some of the best performance. So you got to sort of, benchmark yourself to other relevant aspects. Leadership transitions, another thing you need a very, very careful planning around. When you lose political or executive leadership, these things can tend to go away. So I guess the punchline here on the steps is to go where the energy is and map out working sets of steps to move the organization. But again, I'm a huge fan of annual budgets and organizational strategic plans. So those are a few other points. The other thing is, this is for those of you old enough to remember the old IT world, we used to talk about garbage in, garbage out. If you don't have effective programs, doing a lot of metrics isn't going to get you anywhere. So one of the points I'm making here is that you should be using effective evidence-based interventions that are expected to produce the desired outcomes. And I've always found it fascinating that when you look at the area of evidence-based medicine and they found that a lot of things weren't working, if you're not using evidence-based practice, what are you doing? I mean, it's one of those things where it's not an option. It's like there really aren't a lot of choices. So searching out best practices and effective interventions for the programs and services to make sure what you're measuring has a reasonable shot at being effective. Perhaps commonplace, but not necessarily always done. So organize your interventions in an overall implementation plan. And then this is, we don't have time to go to this, but the balanced scorecard, develop a strategy plan, strategy map in the balanced scorecard world of visual representation of how the objectives and how they all relate to each other. Strategy maps are a little more dynamic than logic models that are pretty linear. Strategy maps are a nice way of mapping out how you can use effective program interventions to get there. So this is a punchline of, use things that work so you're not wasting your time measuring stuff that doesn't. Another one is, I have an embarrassing story here. I don't want to mention where it was, but it was in California, so I'll leave that there. I arrived at an organization that had spent 80 or 90% of their grant money figuring out what to measure. In other words, they went through this enormous number of consultants on a community indicator project, and they had burned through most of the money when their community indicator project was almost identical to the one next door. They could have done a rip the cover off, did a little edit, and be done with it for $1,000 bucks. But they spent $800,000 or $900,000 on searching out a whole new, start from scratch performance measurement system. And we've seen this in the conference today about generally accepted performance principles. I would say another thing that needs to go with that is a very clear performance framework system, either by service or by government. So the suggestion here is don't start from scratch. Look for performance measurement frameworks from similar organizations and adapt them. But again, the sin here is to burn up enormous amounts of resources. So to give you one example, the SDG framework out of the United Nations has 17 goals that cover damn near everything I've ever dealt with. So you sort of been there, and they have indicators. So you can actually get started rather than say, gee, what should we do about poverty? And start from scratch. So that's I think a tip. So adapt larger frameworks to your organization. Look for systems around similar interventions. Public health has got stuff to burn. So if you want to look at effective COVID programs, we know how to do that. But we haven't done it, but that's another story. So the punchline here is to use or adapt an existing performance management framework for the task at hand, and not to start from scratch and waste enormous amounts of resources, which I think is sinful, particularly if public works departments are pretty similar in towns of similar size. The other one, and this is the topic of our book, Results That Matter, partner with community residents or other stakeholders to develop, operate, or use and sustain performance management. In Results That Matter, we basically said that citizens can be actively involved in setting goals, in measuring goals, in helping to produce them. And I see the library issue. If you want people to help increase the rate of reading in that community, volunteers can help. You don't need to, hire someone to do every single task. So, as I say, residents can engage in strategic planning to arrive at key outcomes. They can help produce the outcomes, whether mentoring, reading, or tutoring, help measure the results of the services trained observers, and then help consume performance data and help shape program improvement. So one of the points I think that's critical about going forward on this is that ownership by the community can be very vital to establish and sustaining a performance measurement system. They could be the ones that ask, where's the report? Or what's happening with this program? Not just the internal bureaucratic workings, but you have outside constituencies that want to see the results. And then the other piece of this is, I started out doing management indicator reports with handwritten ballpoint pen charts. It's not necessary to do that anymore. We've got wonderful IT capabilities for performance management. You can use social media and others to get outcomes data, like see, click, fix. If you're not familiar with that, if you see something that needs to be improved in your community, you simply click on it, gives you a location on that fix. So there's a whole raft of ways you can use free or cheap media to provide input to a performance measurement system from the citizens as a whole. The second is communicating results is a lot easier. Interactive websites, email, social media, these things can be very powerful and very easy to use. So tell people if someone cares about, how are the playground cleanups going? You can tell them. I mean, just put it on the web. And then data analysis and reporting. The flexible data visualization tools are amazing. You might have seen the Johns Hopkins COVID materials, which are global in scope and very flexible, and we're very much there. And then the issue of dashboards. In other words, don't just look at the 200 indicators, but have a dashboard of key performance areas. Visual can be on the web, can send it out by email, can send it out on social media. So I guess the punchline here is that you can use IT tools at all steps in the performance management cycle, from development to making program improvements. And this is a blessing we have now, that the information technology world has matured so much that there's a lot of low cost or free tools can be used to help us, which is, I think, a huge benefit. So I guess just to wrap up, I may have gained us some time here. The goal is to develop and sustain performance measurement systems over time so that improvements in service and budget allocations to support outcomes can be made. So that's, to me, the real issue. It's not a matter of ticking boxes. It's better services and putting money where it's effective in terms of getting us outcomes. A systematic approach to designing, implementing, and sustaining performance measurements, I think, pays dividends. You don't waste money on starting over on projects that don't need to be done again. Streamlining steps to focus on resources, on elements that must be addressed. And I particularly think that using frameworks from other places and adapting them is a wonderful way to conserve resources. And then finally, I think we need to learn how to better streamline startup implementation and sustaining performance measurement systems over time, rather than each of us having to start from scratch in our performance and service areas. So that's it. Thank you very much. Very quick.
Thank you, Lyle. Great presentation. It really helps to learn what factors to prioritize in implementing performance measurement. Now we'll have Graham Smith, John Halligan, and Moir Mir talk about performance management in Australia. I think only Graham Smith is here. Yes, Graham.
Yes, good morning from Australia. So I hope I managed to survive with 3 coffees and 2 naps, so I'll just about get there. I wanted to share, but I'm still seeing the previous slides. Does that need to be unshared?
Yep. I can let's see if I can unshare. It says new share, so I'll give you that. No, maybe the moderator has that control. I don't know how to un.
There should be a stop share icon.
It doesn't. There we go. Thank you so much. Every time I go on Zoom, I find something new. There we go. Sorry about that.
No problem. I'll just open up mine and slideshow from beginning. And now I need to find a start sharing somewhere.
There should be a button on the bottom. Share screen.
My screen's adopted the whole screen, so I need to get out of it. Where are we?
It should be in the bottom.
I think if you leave your screen with your PowerPoint open and then navigate over to Zoom and then click, it'll be all right.
Zoom, or how do I get to the Zoom when the screen's open? Yes, somewhere down there. And then we have share screen. Then I go back to it. Yes.
Yeah.
These things are not intuitive.
Now, where are we? Where's the screen? Back to PowerPoint. Right, is that working?
Nope.
No, we don't see it.
All right, I press share screen.
Yeah, and then you have to click on the PowerPoint.
Right, where's the PowerPoint?
Why everyone needs two screens.
No, that's not it.
When you share the screen, there'll be a screen come up and you can choose the PowerPoint screen.
Hang on. I'm not getting the PowerPoint opening up. So that's open. Then I go back to share screen. And I do not see the PowerPoint being open. That's odd.
No, if you click on share screen, do you see like a white screen come up with all the options?
No. So I've got the screen whiteboard. What's that? No, that's just a.
Oh yes.
Yep, it says you're starting.
Yes,
There we go.
yes. Sorry.
No, but
Yeah.
that's only the program. That's not my PowerPoint.
Oh,
So yeah,
Oh,
instead
is
of
that
this,
coming up?
Yeah.
Is that now coming up?
no, just the Word document on that.
So you have
So
to go
I
back
press slideshow, and I'm now seeing my slideshow, but I'm not.
Oh dear.
Go from beginning. Right. Are we good?
Yes, we are.
Right. Thank you very much. And sorry, apologies about that. So the title I changed somewhat. I'm trying to talk about measuring the quality of performance measures. So it's the double hermeneutic, I suppose, measuring measurement. I think that's an important system because we are talking about now. The problem is that performance, although we've all agreed that performance measurement can be valuable, measures are often deficient. One of the steps to address this is to determine how deficient. How do we measure the measures? And this goes back, I think, to some of the generally accepted, well, not generally accepted measurement. How do we measure the measures, and what is the quality in which we can determine the measurement of? How do we measure the measures? The way of doing this, so we reviewed criteria from a range of sources. These were both academic journals, they were the grey sources from business journals, from non-government organisations, all of which had a large number of different criteria that they'd set forward by which performance measures should be assessed.
Well, right.
SMART, I suppose, is the most obvious of these, but there are many, many others. And perhaps I should have used those of Mr. Childs that was mentioned just a few minutes ago. That was a good set as well. Try to take all these criteria to form a reduced set to analyse what the key features are. Compare that with looking at criteria for good performance measures which are adapted from first principles of what makes a good measure. And then we form a final set of criteria. And after all of that, we develop a rubric to assess against those criteria. In other words, we're able to reflect on those measures and be able to find out how good the measures are. These were the sources of criteria. There were many of these, several more, but they tended to reach exclusion. After we'd reached about a dozen, all the news sources of information weren't giving us anything more. The classic one, of course, was SMART, but I think that is a little bit deficient. I remember a previous presentation, I was proposing DUM, which was a different alternatives like the definable, usable, measurable, and DUM is better than SMART. But there's a number of sources there, some of them from the academia, some of them are from audit offices in Australia and the UK, some are from non-government organisations, USA, and also from foreign development organisations, USAID, Global Affairs Canada, and other NGOs such as Climate Eval and Community of Practice. And the idea of using a large range is trying, again, to cover everything that might be thought about with respect to how do we define a quality performance measure? When you look at all of this together, we find that there are a huge number of words that are used. And I put this into this sort of Wordle type picture, and to see I think there are about 39 different sort of descriptives that are used. And you see some of the ones that are turning up as most significant, as being relevant, being balanced, attributable, objective, understandable, but huge numbers. And how do we make sense of this? And really, there was almost a sense of verbal or lexical analysis that we applied to this to try to get it down to a more manageable set of criteria for good performance measures. 39 criteria overall, but obviously significant overlap. Some of the words are similar. The problem is we have in our glorious English language, sometimes the same word has a different meaning, or the same meaning is represented by several different words. The other limitation I should mention here is that when I looked at all that literature, there was not only criteria for performance measures, there's also criteria for setting performance measurement targets, which is obviously a different idea, and also criteria for performance measurement systems, that is the overall structure that lies behind performance measures. So, but this set is only looking at what are the criteria for good performance measures. This is a reduced set. It's only sort of one corner of a big table of 10 or 15 sources and about a similar number of types of criteria. But you'll see here that we do have case. I don't know how I do a pointer. Can we do a pointer? No, sorry, back. But so you'll see that if you look across the relevant, that's all of these sources use the phrase relevant, but they use different words to mean it. I had to read the original document in some detail to find exactly what it was talking about. And sometimes there's the word focused in the top right and also in the bottom left, but it meant different things. So it needed careful reading to see what the actual criteria was. And the actual criteria was these words down the left: relevant, robust, complete, specific. And I managed to isolate this down to about 15 of them. I can't remember the exact number now, 12 to 15. And they were these: relevant, robust, timely, complete, valid, accurate, specific, etc., etc. And that's still far too many to work with. So from there, we can go to what I called a criterion group. And that's a much smaller number of words that can be used to describe good performance measures. The criterion group is not exactly the same. So relevant, robust, and timely have different, slightly different meanings, of course they do, but to group them together to make a manageable set of criteria could be grouped in this way to form a reduced set of criteria that helps us to assess what makes a good performance measure. And of course, as in all these cases, there is an other down the bottom of things that didn't fit anywhere. But that is getting close to what we need to get to in order to find something that is a good way of assessing a quality performance measure. Now, in addition to looking at the literature, we also looked at a top-down or first principles analysis. So in a sense, it was trying to say, well, what is a fundamental requirement of any measurement instrument? And this is, I suppose you might say it's our opinion too, but we felt there was some analysis behind it, which I don't have time to go into here. And we felt that it should be, to be a measurement instrument, you can take the example of a speedometer in your car, if you like. It has to have those things, otherwise it's not going to be functioning very well. It has to be unbiased, precise, responsive, clear, and relevant. So that's the nature of a relevant measurement instrument, be it a ruler or a speedometer or any measurement instrument. Now, one of the main things we've been talking about throughout the session overnight has been, what is the purpose? Now, in the paper that goes behind this, we talked about a different range of purposes, such as accountability, performance improvement, making decisions between options. The main focus that I had been working on was accountability. I was talking about public measures that are reported publicly and considered by legislatures. And what are the additional criteria if you are going to use a performance measure for that purpose? One of the problems with the focus on accountability is that people can seek to distort performance measures. It's the old case of trying to game the measure in order to pass some sort of test. So the additional criteria has to be resistance to distortion. If something is for the purpose of accountability, then by its very nature, it has to be verifiable. That's sort of the fundamental idea behind auditing accounts, as we talked about with the generally accepted accounting principles. And also, it needs to be complete, because you can't have a set of performance measures that only focus on one element, because then a manager could seek to improve that element of performance without covering the entire set of things that are necessary in order to achieve a good result. So these are additional criteria for the specific purpose of accountability. Now, if we put these all together, so that means from the first list and the second list, we come up with a rather larger list of accountability measures. Again, we're getting to a set of criteria that is too long in order to come to a way of assessing the quality of a measure. But this can be reduced. And again, we have a process of deleting some of these because, again, I don't have time to go through the argument. But again, I can do some sort of logical analysis that states that these 4 areas cover the main issues to do with the quality of a performance measure that's designed to address accountability. They need to be relevant. In other words, it's no good measuring something that has no connection with the objectives of an organization. If it's not clear, then obviously it's not usable from the point of view of any user. It needs to be accurate. In other words, it can't be fuzzy or indistinct. And of course, it needs to be complete, or the set of measures needs to be complete in the sense that they cover all of the key elements that an organization has. So that becomes, in a sense, the result of what I consider to be relevant, considered to be the criteria for a performance measure. And I think this idea is certainly not unique. There are other people that have come up with similar short and succinct lists such as this. And I believe this is consistent with other work that's been done in the field. But having done that, that then means that we can go on to develop a rubric in order to assess against those particular criteria. Now, I was working in the public sphere, looking at things that were published in annual reports on the web from other documents that were published by government departments. Now, the accuracy goes to a great deal of detail as to exactly how a performance measure is produced. And I couldn't determine that from public documents. So the only things I can measure were the relevance, the clarity, and the completeness. But for those 3, I developed a rubric and tested against assessments of 9 organisations in Australia. We went through all those, double-checked the rubrics, made sure they made sense, refined them, and using a scale of 0 or very low to 3 high quality. And these are the rubrics that we came up with. So a rubric for relevance, the highest score. I don't want to go through all these in great detail, but you'll get the general idea. The highest score is the performance measure reflects almost perfectly an objective of the organisation. So it's highly relevant to what the organisation is doing. And then there is a scale down to 0. There's little or no connection with an organisational objective. And I'm afraid to say that in the Australian context, there were a few performance measures that did score 0 because that really wasn't related at all to what the organisation was trying to do. A rubric for clarity takes a little bit more complexity in the middle of that. But for instance, I can state that a performance measure is clear if it's using recognised units of measurements. It's clear exactly how it could be calculated and what its preferred direction is. Sometimes it's not actually obvious whether you want more or less of something in the public sector. I'm thinking of the example of, say, patients who are presenting to a hospital. Is it better that a hospital handles more because they're more efficient? Or is it better that they handle less because the health of the population is better? So that is a case where the direction of a performance measure is not clear. And then at the opposite end, you get some measures that are so vague as to be totally not accessible. And finally, the rubric for completeness. Again, this one is applying to the quality of a set of performance measures that is used by an organisation. And again, the highest level is that it addresses all aspects of the relevant organisational objective. And alternatively, it totally does not cover anything that the organisation does. So it's totally incomplete. The organisational objectives just are not covered by that set of performance measures. So having developed this set of measures, how would we use them? And as I say, this particular thing I'm talking about today was really a step on the road to a larger piece of work that talked about what the quality of performance measures was, how they varied, how they depended upon the type of organisation, how they depended upon the jurisdiction in which they were established. So they were used to assess the quality of, there were 554 distinct performance measures used by 9 organisations in Australia over 6 years. Over the period of time, of course, some measures were dropped and some were added. And that's why the number of measures got to be so large. I think others would have criticised the fact that there were so many, and that was certainly the case, that I think it failed in having too many measures for some of these organisations. These were departments of state. They tend to be large organisations like a Department of Health or a tax office or things of that nature. So what do we do with these? For instance, here is an example of looking at the quality of the performance measures as they varied over a period of time. And in this case, we're looking at the Australian government, federal agencies. And in this case, we have completeness is remaining high, relevance is fairly high, but the clarity down here has been low. It did improve, but it started off very low. Now that's what's going on in the Commonwealth of Australia, in the federal jurisdiction. But in one of our state governments, click on this. So this is one of our state governments, and here it was the other way around. So here you'll see that the clarity was much higher, whereas the relevance was lower and the completeness was low as well. And this is a common conundrum in trying to get a high quality performance measure in the complex arena of public administration. If something is very clear, then how do you capture the complex nature of public administration? If you're trying to measure something that's really clear, often it's too simplistic and it's not as relevant as it should be. So this would be measuring things like numbers of people presenting, and so it's not going to capture the actual objective. It's going to be more an output-based rather than an outcome-based. Whereas if I go back to the Australian federal government agency, their relevance was higher, but their completeness, their clarity was lower. So they would say things like the extent to which an organisation is conforming with the law. And that is relevant, obviously it is, but it's very unclear as to how you would measure that. So that's the conundrum in measurement between different types of organisations. But that's more put as an example as to how this form of measurement of the quality of performance measures can be used. And I would suggest getting to this sort of approach is going to be an assistance in getting to a generally accepted performance principles, because one of the principles would be surely that we need to have high quality performance measurement, but what is high quality? So in my conclusion, I'm saying it is possible to produce a consistent and logical set of criteria for the quality of performance measures. And the assessment of the quality of measures can be useful in understanding trends across time, differences between jurisdictions and what is driving those different jurisdictions, and that's another matter which I won't go into here, and differences between types of organisations. Again, large complex organisations tended to have different sets of performance measure quality than the smaller or more informal organisations. And so this becomes a basis of trying to understand what is going on with the basically the performance measurement ability of different types and forms of organisations. And that is the end for me.
Thank you, Graham. This was a great presentation. Looking back at performance measuring the measures. Sometimes we need to do that. So with this, I will hand it over to, yes, I'll hand it over to Dr. Catherine Willoughby, the discussion for the panel for her reviews. Yes.
Well, thank you. And it's so exciting to hear this work because it's all coming together, as I think Christopher Pollitt says, converging. All of this research and practitioner experience is converging around performance measurement. And I will say I'm very positive about it. I know that, you know, we are constantly working at this, but it's exciting to see that after, you know, decades of work with performance measures, they are making a difference and we're getting better every day. So, so I'm just going to go through your presentations and tell you the things that I like best about them and how they help us better understand how to implement excellent systems. David's work is, of course, phenomenal and important to understand the aspects of performance measurement and performance management that you know, sort of has a bad name, and you know, people say been there, done that, not going to do it again. And his points coalesce around much of what I personally have learned in my own research with Elaine Liu and others regarding performance management and our attenuation of that to performance budgeting, and that is introducing measures as a positive both for the organization, for staff, as well as for clients and residents and the public in general. Implementing a reward system, however small, I've always said, even if it's an employee's picture in a newsletter, you know, that says this is this week's, you know, performance promoter, something like that. So these are small things we can do to keep people on task. Absolutely including staff in the development of measures. And this gets at relevance, of course. Seeking their assistance with developing measures, they get buy-in. And they, in our research about performance budgeting in juvenile justice agencies, time and time again, folks told us, my opinions are listened to, and I have a part in the process, so it makes me committed to it. I think, you know, the idea of encouraging B+ is important to think about. And as a professor, we know that this is something we have to manage with our students. You know, we want to look to B+ and consider those, you know, consider those targets at, even when we're approaching them, we want to continue to keep the staff involved and want to participate. Using measures for multiple things, reviewing of staff, strategic planning. So this is what Elaine and I have called integration into a system where measures have to show up continually through a process and for the activities ongoing, that you would see measures applied in the budget process, that you see measures applied in strategic planning, that they show up. Very important. Having a simple program and few measures. I remember consulting in West Bengal, and they showed me their performance system, and it had just, you know, a rainbow of colors for every program. And you know, the first thing I said is you need to get these, you know, 1,000 down to 3. I mean, it was just, it's impossible, and it can't be done. And all of those things come together to create this performance culture, which is what we want to do. That can span administrations, because what we're dealing with, as Mark said it early on today, you know, the fact is we've got political systems and political contexts that we have to work within, and those change. And so we have to have that structure that has the ability to adapt to the new administration, but yet maintain the integrity of measures. Josie, I love your study. Of course, you know, I've done so much work with Elaine and others on the legal framework for performance budgeting, which is extremely important, that we have found determines how well, in this case, states implement a performance budgeting system based on what's emphasized in that structure. I think it's fascinating to look at public libraries. I'm wondering, given that you're using Bozeman's grid, are you scoring, kind of scoring libraries on their publicness? You see what I'm saying? Are you
Yeah,
doing that?
that was the original idea. And I mean, we are going to nest things in state. So I think there is,
because there's going to be a vast difference between a private library and a public one. And particularly, I think of public ones today. I'm in Atlanta, and our public library is undergoing, one of them is undergoing tremendous transformation, because libraries are so different today. Ours, to be honest, must accommodate the homeless coming in, possibly taking a shower. So, you know, the libraries are really undergoing a lot of different changes that I think if you could get some sort of scoring of publicness, it would offer you a chance, you know, and it may be that it's, you know, it's, well, we'll leave it at that, because, you know, you did have relatively few completely private, I think, if I remember that.
Yes, there's not a lot, but I mean, nonprofit is certainly not the same as city, and I think we can entangle some differences in city.
I think that's something to work on, because once you develop a score like that, it's really valuable in being able to conduct research. Also, I'm curious about a couple of things. For instance, computer use by the general public. You know, I don't want to be a problem here, but, you know, is it the same 5 people coming in and using the computer, and they're using it for 5 hours a day? Because I've seen that happen in our libraries, some libraries around here and other places. And also, you know, is it the same 100 people coming into the library and using the library? And that might happen, particularly in a small library, perhaps. And then the other thing I thought about is not only print material, but also video material that, you know, now libraries are stores for, I mean, CDs, DVDs, all these other things that they, so you seem to have a good handle on the programming, but there are some deeper questions in there related to service delivery and the number of people and the number of different people using out of that population. But
also, the librarians enter the information themselves, so it's self-identified, and I'm worried about the quality of data, right? Like, how are folks counting attendance library to library? Yeah, we think it's a number, but, you know, at a kids program, are they counting parents? Are they not counting parents? So I do think there are some real issues in this data set, which is probably why a ton of people don't use it. We are still weighing those things with which variables we use for performance, like which ones do we think, you know, to Graham's work, actually get at the relevance.
Yep. And it may be that you do some focus work on just public libraries as they're the city, county, or what, you know, ones that you can define as clearly what we would think of as a public library, leaving the others out, even nonprofit, perhaps, just dig into that. And certainly conducting work where you might, you know, contact some libraries and ask how they develop those metrics. But great work. It's very exciting work, and I think it takes us in a new direction for by taking us into libraries that are becoming more important today than ever. Lyle's work, launching a performance system, and such great things here. The long-term process, obviously we find that, in our study of the 50 states and juvenile justice systems and performance budgeting, time and time again, these agency personnel were very positive about utilizing their performance metrics for programming and budget execution, even if it wasn't successful in helping them land more money in the legislative process. So they understand the long-term value of a system. Let's see. You brought up the important points of the first thing I would ask folks when I conducted a lot of training about performance management and performance measurement systems is, why do you want the system? What do you want to do? And I usually would ask them to give me the top 3 things that you want to attack with this system. That's very important. What's the impetus to create it? And then where are you today to figure out, how we can go about coming up with something. You certainly can't be comprehensive in a system. You just have to chip away at the big ticket items that you're interested in tackling, which if you're creating a system, quote, from scratch, it's to get everybody on board with a couple of measures and to start posting them, putting them somewhere. So small steps. Love, absolutely important to have benchmarking, because we see that just that moves programs way past a symbolic presentation of numbers to important information that you need to understand where you're going. So the benchmarking, and in much of my research, we find that that's a hard thing for agencies to do unless they're required to do it in their system, because that is essentially how they're can be held accountable. Absolutely looking to neighbors, seeing what's out there. Don't reinvent the wheel. There's no reason. We've got so much stuff. It's just, and it's important just to get started. We just say, just get started, and if you want to start with, a couple of agencies and you tell them you're going to be the pilot, and, you got to figure out if you can give them something to be the pilot. These are all things that are important and can save time and help us move forward. And then I think you talked about the IT component, and the IT component is just vital today, because it's exposure, it provides transparency, but it has to be well working, meaning you need to have somebody attending to that. It can't, once it becomes old data, if it's data people can't read, it'll be a problem. So that's very important to be thinking about the IT component of a performance system. Simple, all of these things can help enhance public trust and relevancy. And then Graham's work, just obviously wonderful to come up with a rubric. I use my grading rubrics, and they're big matrices with, excellent, good, fair, poor, and boxes are filled, and all I have to do is put the green stamp in the box for my students and just say, read this and you'll know what's going on. These are really helpful. And I think of the ones you bring up, relevant, clear, accurate, and complete, I was intrigued that complete actually was higher in some instances, because I would think this is one of the ones that would be harder to achieve completeness and would keep the number of measures as small as possible. And that's not always the case, but I was intrigued with that. But certainly, relevance, clear, and accuracy are going to be extremely important. Relevance has the chance to bring in others, staff and the public in the development of measures, and have everybody on the same page. Accuracy is what Mark was talking about earlier, that we are going to have to continue to press governments, and governments are going to need to work on the accuracy of measures to combat the politics of government work. And that's a really tough thing. And so I'm very glad that you brought that up. So all in all, I think this is a really wonderful panel that can bring together important precepts that we know now relate to a strong performance system that is doable, and can become relevant and clear, accurate, and possibly complete. So thank you all.
Thank you, Catherine, for your excellent feedback. This is really helpful. It is very interesting to listen to the feedback and all the presentations. I would like to ask if the respondents would like to share some insights, or would you like to respond to Catherine's feedback, or if you have any questions for the other respondents? Yes, I think David and then Graham. Yes.
I'd just like to make a brief comment about one point. The idea of sustaining the program, and also sustaining it like through new leadership, has come up a few times. And every organization that I left, when I left it, its performance program was sustained and kept going. And the reason for that, I believe, was that while I was there, as I said, I did performance reviews. We lived by performance, and we promoted up through the system the people that had documentably done the best work. So what that meant was that when I left, by the time I left, people in the departmental leadership positions were people that they themselves had succeeded and had moved up through the program. And so the performance measure program had been beneficial to them personally. Mm-hmm. And so they had the buy-in. And then secondly, not only was it personal and possibly even to some degree selfish, but also we were constantly documenting the organization's overall successes. Mm-hmm. We've improved productivity times. We've reduced errors. We've reduced attendance issues, blah, 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 blah. And so they were constantly bombarded with how the measurement program had documentably improved performance in the organization. So between documenting improvements that had been implemented, and between the people that had risen into management positions having personally benefited from coming up through the program, then they were in place to succeed me and to move into the leadership positions. And that occurred every stop along my path. Now that brings me to the point. What is really, really needed in the field of performance measurement is maybe Miss Willoughby starts doing it at Georgia. Maybe it is done by NCPP itself. But there starts needing to be a data bank of public servants that have come up through the performance measurement program and buy into it and believe in it, and so that whenever someone is going to leave an organization and they are looking for a successor, there is a place to go where you can say, I want to hire someone that is rooted in performance management to take over my organization. Who is such a person? Where are they? How can I get in touch with them? That data bank of potential future leaders that are grounded in how to do performance management, that needs to exist somewhere. I'm done.
Wow, that's a nice project. I don't think I'm gonna be doing it, but that's a good one. Yeah, and I mean, you're exactly right. Your efforts at transparency and buy-in, that's what you need so that when administrations change, you've got the backbone, the skeleton that's staying behind and leading the charge. Thank you. Graham.
Yes, thank you. Firstly, a small one. Thank you for your generosity in saying that Australian performance measures were complete, but I think that's at the expense of probably having too many of them. If you have 20 or 30 measures and there's only 3 or 4 key objectives, then they really should be complete. I'd like to make one larger point, almost philosophical, that went through the whole day's purpose. And that goes to the objective of performance measures. I think you were saying, Catherine, let's set the 2 or 3 key objectives for a performance measurement system. But I think that can be a challenge even to do 2 at once in the way of doing both accountability and performance improvement. If you have an accountability-oriented set of performance measures, then it's owned outside the organization by people that are checking on the organization. So in government, it's owned, say, by the office of the president or the governor, or it's owned by an audit institution. Whereas if it's for performance improvement, it's owned by the organization itself and